Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. Today, we're going to get into another Panthers loss, and this one, as we wrap up the season, has a very reminiscent feeling to how the season started. And this was something we talked about last week and over the past couple of weeks. You want to end the season on a high note. Obviously, the Atlanta game is still looming. You can go out on that note, but a lot has got to change between what just happened in Tampa Bay and what's going to happen in Atlanta. And my question to you is where do the issues start on defense when you allow an offense guided by Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen to score on 7 out of their 9 drives? One of those 2 drives they didn't score on was the drive that ended the game and they were in the red zone. And the other was a punt in the first half. That was it. They got 5 touchdowns, 2 field goals, racked up 48 points. Just a dominant performance on all 3 levels by the Buccaneers.
Yeah, and you have to give credit, like you're saying, to Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield. It's not like we gave them a tough fight and anything, and they just pulled away. They had a game plan and they executed it, right? They did what they needed to do and took care of business. And I'm pretty sure they're in the lead for the NFC South now. If they just win, it's over and they make it to the playoffs. So kudos to them. But you're right. This reminds me a lot of that Saints game to start the year. It's like we've come full circle, right? Bryce started that game. He was horrible, got benched, and finally came back. And he played decently in this game, like in the first half in particular, but it didn't matter when the defense is just a sieve. Anybody can get through it if they have a competent game plan. And the big talk and the talk with Evero is going to be everlasting throughout the offseason, or until we know if he's coming back or if we're getting a new defensive coordinator or this or that. That Saints game to start the year, everybody was healthy except DJ Wanham, right? J.C. Horn played, Shaq Thompson played. Derek Brown did get injured in that game, but he played the entire game. And yet we were still just giving up play after play. That first drive, Alvin Kamara had I think it was 3 or 4 carries, and each of them was a successful run in terms of success rate. And then they hit the bomb to Rashid Shaheed, and that kicked off the downward spiral for our defense. But this game, it was tough to watch, especially coming off of that big win, emotional win against Arizona. And it makes me think back to when we hosted the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you look at the first half of that game, it was kind of similar to how the Buccaneers played the first half in this game. The difference, they didn't settle for field goals when they needed to. And they just went for it and converted touchdowns. We had 5 scoring opportunities when we played them the first time, but again, we went for field goals and missed them. They didn't do that, and they took care of business. And like I'm saying, it doesn't matter what we do on offense when they're going to score 40, whatever. It was 48, right? I don't even remember how many points they scored at the end. That's how bad it was.
After the punt block, I turned off that game and kept watching Red Zone. It was very disheartening to kind of see that level of performance. But leading up to the weekend, we recorded on Thursday, and I don't think either of us were necessarily expecting J.C. Horn and Chuba Hubbard to be out. And those were big difference makers. I mean, the drop off is to a guy in Mike Boone. And I think Chuba Hubbard gets you a couple more yards, maybe puts you in a third and manageable. I think one of the bigger issues with this offense is we are not a very efficient offense on early downs. We don't have a good screen game. We don't have the ability to just pick up a few yards and put yourself in a position where it's third and short. Allow Bryce to go to work like we saw kind of after the bye against Kansas City and Tampa Bay and Philadelphia. When you're in those third and manageable situations, you're playing man and you're able to hit your one-on-one kind of matchup. And the unfortunate thing is Bryce had a lot of those one-on-one matchups early on in the first half to kind of keep us in the game. And Xavier Legette couldn't come up with a couple catches. And it seemed like we were relying really on Adam Thielen and trying to get him open in opportunities. Jalen Coker obviously had a couple of nice grabs. Love to see him more involved. But with that going on offense and then JC Horn missing on defense, I think you tweeted this out before the game. This just had the feeling that Mike Evans was going to feast. And sure enough, he did. And then because we started trying to bracket him and take away Mike Evans, Jalen McMillan started going off. And then their backup tight ends were looking like Rob Gronkowski out there against our backup linebackers. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating to see when you get down to the backups that you don't have at this point in the season, given all the injuries, just a mentality and a philosophy and a culture on defense that you're able to perform. Like, we couldn't generate pressure. We couldn't come up with turnovers. We just got ran over and they did whatever they wanted on offense. And it was a very long day.
Well, the tweet you're bringing up, it was like week 17 matchup against Mike Evans without JC Horn. That was in direct reference to a couple years ago when we could have won the NFC South had we beaten Tampa Bay. And we were up, I think, 21-10 in the first half of that game because they muffed a punt or something. And then Tom Brady and Mike Evans just feasted on, it was like, I think CJ Henderson was one of the corners. Keith Taylor Jr. was one of our corners. And they just had like 3 75-yard touchdowns and won the game like that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going to happen, right? But no, it was Bucky Irving would just run them all the way down there, and Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen were selfish. And instead of giving Bucky Irving managers who might have been in the fantasy football championship a reward for getting them down there, they just gave Mike Evans multiple 1-yard touchdown grabs. So if you had Mike Evans, I'm sure you're happy. If you had Bucky Irving, you're still probably happy because he got like 80 yards per drive in the first half. But Chuba Hubbard, I think, was the bigger loss for us. You mentioned like how to keep it in manageable situations, down in and down out. The first drive we scored. We went down the field, scored, clinical, scripted drive by Bryce Young, Thielen, Coker, whatever. The next 2 drives after that were both 3-and-outs. Do you know how many run plays we called on those drives?
Out of those 3-and-outs, I want to say we probably ran like 2 times. A lot of
0.
it was drop back pass. Oh, wow.
0.
Okay.
Both drives were 3 straight passes that we did not convert. And that's just not tenable. It's not acceptable. I know we don't have Chuba Hubbard. I know you're relying on Raheem Blackshear a lot, Mike Boone a lot. But if we need to stay in the game, you have to stick to your bread and butter, no matter who the running back is. You have to show that you're stubborn with the run, and we didn't do that. And then before the half, we get the 1 touchdown, the second touchdown, rather, to Adam Thielen, which was a beautiful throw and catch by Bryson Thielen. I think that's the longest touchdown of his career. Certainly the longest air yards throw I think Bryce has ever had. It was over 40. And then again before half, we got him into field goal range. But Eddie Pinheiro ended up missing the kick. That's another guy that we're going to have a discussion about, I think, probably following next week when we do our little beginning of the offseason primer. But just overall, all 3 phases were definitely a letdown. We had a blocked punt as well. That's why I say all 3 phases. But it was the defense that was the main issue for sure. And like you said, this is a recurring theme with the Carolina Panthers. If there's any good thing to take away that we're going to have a season that ends early, it's we only have to watch this happen one more time. We only have to watch the defense get gashed once more, give up. I don't know how many rushing yards we give up in this game. I'll look it up while I'm talking, but it feels like it was another 200-yard performance. It's just rough. It's rough.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at Panthers' worst performances since 2011, and I've posted this graphic multiple times throughout the year, and it's sad and unfortunate that it's even a reality, but when you're looking at kind of the Cam era leading up to the David Tepper era, there was about 7 years there, and it's been about 7 years since 2018 till now, and 7 of the 30 worst performances over that 14-year span have happened this year. Almost a quarter of the worst performances we've seen for most of our viewing experience of the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, we go back to the 2000s with Jake Delhomme and Steve Smith and Dan Morgan and all those great guys. But when you're looking at a large portion of Panthers history and it's just this abysmal play game after game. I mean, last year, we want to talk about how bad this team was at 2-15. They only had 3 of these performances that would count about as bad. And those games were obviously the Jacksonville Jaguars game where you get shut out and you have a bunch of drops, the Dallas Cowboys game where Micah Parsons and that defensive line wrecked Bryce Young the first go round, and then the Miami Dolphins game. And it's like, okay, so there's 3 games that happened last year that were just abysmal. And there's 7 games that have happened like that this year. And something's got to change. It's got to be Evero. There's got to be changes to how this team builds, because clearly the offseason additions didn't improve anything. I mean, the defensive performance on Sunday, the only 2 performances that have been worse over the past 14 years since 2011 are the TJ Watt hit game, where the Pittsburgh Steelers absolutely obliterated our defense on Thursday Night Football. And then the other game is another like crushing game, and it was the Steve Smith revenge game in 2014 when the Ravens did whatever they wanted to. And so when you put it in that upper echelon of performances, like, this isn't acceptable. Like, it needs to go to like a Mike Tomlin principle where the standard is the standard. You have to have a culture, and this clearly is not living up to it.
For sure. We did give up over 200 rushing yards, in case you were wondering. 202, so not like the 250 or whatever we've been giving up, but still quite horrible. And yeah, like you said, it's a standard, right? Obviously, we lose guys like Brian Burns, Frankie Louvu, Jeremy Chin, who had a nice performance on Sunday Night Football against the Falcons. But you still have to have the guys in there playing at a high level. A lot of these guys that we brought in this offseason were people that Evero had coached before, or like the players had been on a staff around him. So there was familiarity. That obviously isn't translating. Jordan Fuller, one of those guys, was a healthy scratch in this game. Damani Richardson, the undrafted free agent, got the start over him. He was one of the lone good pieces I thought we had on defense on the field on Sunday. A lot more. Ashawn Robinson didn't have the greatest game, although I think he's had a fine season. Josie Jewell didn't play in this game. I think he's on IR to end the year. It's just a ton of these. Dane Jackson had the Dan Morgan familiarity. I don't think he's worked out to the level that we expected. Just a lot of these guys, you're right, haven't worked out, and there has to be a wholesale change going into next season, because like we said, even at the start of the year, when we had everybody except DJ Wadham, the results were still the same from a defensive perspective. So moving forward with the Panthers, who are some of the guys that you would like them to take a look at defensive coordinator-wise, assuming Ejiro Evero is let go or he wants to pursue an opportunity elsewhere? Because I listened to the Processing Blue pod with Mike Kay, friend of the show, and Alex Zetlow, 2 Charlotte Observer beat reporters who cover the team. And they bring up that while firing Evero may not be in the best interest of the team, maybe Evero wants another opportunity elsewhere, because it's not like we're flush with defensive talent, right? And he is respected around the league. Maybe he ends up going somewhere else. The point is, if he's not here next year, who are some guys that you would be looking at to fill that void?
Well, it's going to be interesting because you shift from this 3-4 philosophy to a 4-3 front. And what's interesting is you look at this defense, it ranked 26th in EPA per play metrics last year. Obviously, you lose a lot of talent. A bunch is on IR this year, and you drop to the 32nd worst defense. And at this point, you need a pendulum swing to where you're obviously not an average defense, but you're a little below average. You're in the low 20s. And a guy that I think can really take talent on the defense and get the most out of them is going to be a guy that comes from more of a Ravens philosophy background. And what I mean by that is when Mike McDonald was in Baltimore last year, he had Anthony Weaver underneath him, Denard Wilson, and Zach Orr. All 4 of those guys have been promoted since last year. Mike McDonald becomes the Seattle Seahawks head coach. You have Anthony Weaver heading to Miami. He has been a phenomenal defensive play caller for them as they have tried to stay in playoff contention. And then you have Zach Orr, the linebackers coach, who is now promoted within Baltimore. Obviously a rough year for that unit as they're kind of cleaning up some communication issues and getting healthy for the postseason. But the guy that I think I want to clue in on is Denard Wilson. He's done a good job with the Tennessee Titans this year. Obviously, they have a lot of talent on that defense, especially when you look at how it's comprised on paper, both from what they've allocated from a salary cap standpoint and even a draft capital standpoint. So this is a guy that I think could get the most out of the talent that's on this group, is going to be able to relate to the players and bring an identity to this defense that's missing. Outside of that, you might want to bring up Robert Saleh. Wink Martindale's been killing it at Michigan this year. Obviously has a lot of prior NFL experience, former Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator. So a couple of these guys on the list have a specific background. But for me personally, Denard Wilson would be a guy I'd be leaning into if Brian Callahan and the Titans part ways and they restart kind of again next offseason.
Yeah, for sure. I really like the Denard Wilson, Mike McDonald type of tree. We saw that it took a little bit, but Mike McDonald has his philosophy set with the Seahawks this season, and I think any of those guys that were underneath him last year in Baltimore have each done great jobs to this point in the year. Obviously, it took some time for Baltimore to get going. I think the Dolphins are an underrated defense, and the Titans certainly. The defense is the strength of their team. I'm always going to bring up Robert Saleh. I think what he did in San Francisco. Now, granted, they spent a ton of draft capital on the defense, but their defense year in and year out was at the top of the league. When he was the head coach of the Jets before they let him go, his defense was quite good, both of those full years and the year, or I guess this past year, those 4 or 5 games that he was there, their defense was pretty good to decent there. Other guys to look at, maybe Ryan Nielsen. We don't know what the future of the Jags holds this year. There's like a rumor going around that Ben Johnson to the Jags is like the worst kept secret in the league. I don't know if Ben Johnson's going to go somewhere where Trent Baalke is currently employed, so I'm not sure about that one. But if he comes, maybe he brings somebody from the Lions staff to be his defensive coordinator. Matt Eberflus, for all of his faults as a head coach, he was a damn good defensive coordinator in Indy. And when he took over the defense last year for Chicago, they were the number 1 scoring defense after the bye week. So he certainly has a good defensive philosophy. Todd Bowles, if they let go of him, I'm not sure. He might be on the older end, and I don't know if he's going to want to come to a team that he's beaten twice now, and he knows just how bad the situation is in Carolina, so I'm not sure there. And then a dark horse one, and I know when I wrote down this name earlier, you wanted to immediately delete it and scratch it off, but Ron Rivera has been getting some buzz across the league with head coaching interviews, and he's been at a couple Panthers games this season, most recently at the Cardinals game, calling it on the radio with I think Jake Delhomme is one of their radio guys there. So maybe he wants to get back in the Bank of America Stadium. I think he was a good defensive coach. His roots come from him being a defensive coordinator going back to San Diego. I think he was with Chicago as well as a defensive coordinator before obviously becoming the Panthers head coach. So he knows his way around a defense. He likes the 4-3 front. Famously, David Tepper is the one who made him change it. And since then, we've deployed the odd front, and it hasn't worked out too well for us. So maybe he wants to get us back to the even front. Who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised if Rivera, if he doesn't get a head coaching job, becomes a guy that is a defensive coordinator, or if not, a defensive assistant in the league next year, because I think he wants to be back in the league. And certainly, I think his philosophy was well met when he was a head coach here.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about Ron Rivera as a defensive play caller, I think it's very in the same line of thought as a Matt Eberflus, a guy that has prior head coaching experience, obviously respect around the league, knows his way around the defense. I think when you look at it from the Carolina Panthers perspective, and the reason why I wanted to omit it from the list is you have a guy that was a former head coach, now in a position where he is calling plays. He is in a major leadership role with the team. And I'm wondering if at times there would be clash with Dave Canales or even ownership, since David Tepper was the guy who originally fired him. So I know your analogy was Dom Capers went from being the head coach to a senior assistant. I just think a senior assistant role is a little bit different than being a coordinator on a team that you've also been a head coach for. So I could see it being gray area and just being a guy that obviously is going to get another opportunity in the league. I think he deserves that. I just don't think it's going to be here in Charlotte.
Yeah, the report was that he's going to interview with the New York Jets. I know a lot of people on Twitter have talked about him going to the Bears. I think they're going to go for like a young offensive guy because that's like the trend nowadays, especially with a young QB. But he is certainly well respected around the league. I wouldn't mind it as long as he doesn't have like the roster control that he seemed to have in Washington. A lot of his draft picks during his tenure there weren't super great. But then again, Marty Herney was a consultant, or no, I think he was the assistant GM there for quite a while. And we know Herney's track record after the first round isn't always the greatest. Bring him back to evaluate this year's first round pick, please, because we're going to have a high one, it seems. Other negatives, I think, from the Panthers game, and I hate to keep harping on the negatives, but we need to talk about them because while Bryce Young balled out as a deep ball thrower, that was like the only positive thing that we could really take away. You brought it up earlier, the Xavier Legette stuff. It seems like he's regressed throughout his rookie season. I'm not ready to call him like Jonathan Mingo 2 yet, but I think he's in his own head. And I think that's a very not acceptable, but it's something that you get with rookies, right? Who may not be used to the speed of the game. It looks like he's just like locating balls poorly, not getting his hands in the right place. And hopefully he can turn that around because I see the vision with what they thought he could be. Like, I think he can be a big body over the middle of the field, maybe work like kind of a Chris Godwin role, something like that. But certainly right now, I don't think he's playing at his peak level, even though he is battling a wrist injury. And I just hope he turns it around maybe this week, but really dials in the offseason because receiver is still, I think, a good position of need that the Panthers need to attack. And if we don't get a requisite return for our first round pick, we traded into the first round this year to get this guy. It just seems like another, I don't want to call it a wasted pick yet, but I don't want it to become a wasted draft pick for the team that is already pretty bereft of homegrown talent.
Yeah. And your board, I even shared this sentiment on Twitter around the draft. You had a guy like Ladd McConkey there.
Yeah.
A guy that would have been phenomenal, would have been the Adam Thielen replacement, because remember, Adam Thielen, one of the most productive wide receivers over the past 2 years for the Panthers. And I don't think it's necessarily even close. And you can get that production from now a rookie who can learn from one of the better wide receivers. That made a lot more sense. But instead it was, okay, let's go find this X wide receiver. And now we're going into this offseason, and you see a large portion of the Panthers fan base caping for a T. Higgins, a DK Metcalf. I think Garrett Wilson plays kind of the role that it's a little bit different how he plays wide receiver than a Jalen Coker, but he's not going to be that X guy that's going to win on the boundary. And like you've even mentioned before in this podcast, wide receivers today get moved all over the place. That's not necessarily the skill set you're looking for, but clearly there is a need there. And Xavier Legette has underwhelmed in his rookie year. And I think we expected that because he was a raw prospect coming out. And you have seen glimpses of what he could be. It's like you said, it seems like over the past several weeks coming out of the bye, honestly, where it's just he's in his head. He's not just making the plays that are in front of him. And it's cost us some wins, and it's cost us some momentum in games. And that's that you can't get that back. And you just hope, like you said, he learns from these mistakes in the offseason.
For sure. Just to the point to where, while I would love to have a guy like Travis Hunter on the team, I'm not sure from a team building perspective they want to spend back-to-back first-round picks attacking the receiver position, especially when the defense is as bad as it is. The last, I guess, negative point I wanted to bring up, and I talked about this earlier too, I think the special teams has regressed throughout the season as well. Johnny Hekker doesn't have the leg he used to, and I'm not blaming him for the blocked punt. You know, that's on coverage, that's on blocking up front. Excuse me. But throughout the season, and Eddie Pinheiro is at fault as well. I think the special teams has certainly declined. Again, thankfully, next week is the last week we're going to have to endure that, but the special teams is a big point I want to bring up because JJ Jansen, Johnny Hekker, Eddie Pinheiro, all free agents next or this offseason. So they have some decisions to make. And if Pinheiro, who he did like a soft holdout this past offseason, if they don't want him back and if they don't want Johnny Hekker back, they're going to have to make some decisions.
Yeah. And special teams, you can add a punter on day 3, say you're able to move back, you get an extra 6th pick for moving back a couple slots. I understand what some people say about using that on a special teams player, but it's also very easy to find some of those guys in free agency. There are kickers all the time available in free agency. So I think grabbing one in the offseason, at least for competition purposes, should be good. Eddie Pinheiro has been underwhelming as a Carolina Panther. I understand that he's got a high field goal percentage rate, but at the same time, it seems like when he does miss, it's key extra points and field goals that would be the ultimate difference maker in a very close game. So with that element, I think it is everything's on the table, from the defense to special teams to the wide receiver room, because Thielen's getting older. Leggett has looked a little slow to start his year. There's still a lot of needs, and I think the only bright spots really on this team come down to the offensive line, Bryce Young taking a step in year 2, and Jalen Coker. I think you can throw Chuba Hubbard in there, but he was already starting to come into his own last year. But that's really only the couple bright spots we have to really talk about going into the next kind of couple weeks.
Yeah, for sure. We're not playing for the playoffs, right? The only thing that we can do this next week is, I guess, kick Atlanta out of the picture, kind of like how we did with the Cardinals. They were behind the 8 ball already, but we pushed them off the table. We pushed them into the pocket. We can do that with Atlanta, but given how they played on Sunday night, who knows how that game's going to turn out. There is a game, though, and it will be Sunday Night Football this upcoming week. What are we at? 272 games now, because we have the extra week of games. Game 272 will be the Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions. Both teams currently sit 14-2, and it's the battle for the number 1 seed in the NFC. And it's the battle for, I guess it would be the 5th overall seed, whoever loses, the top wildcard team, who would get the luxury of playing probably the Buccaneers or the Rams. I think that one still has to be sorted out too, depending on those games. But a huge high leverage situation game for these two NFC North teams. And given how Detroit looked last night on defense, again, we're recording on a Tuesday, I don't think it's a shoe-in like we would have thought maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago that, hey, Detroit's going to win this and automatically get it.
I mean, they have 6 of their starters from week 1 on IR. The defense looks a lot different than it did the first time these two teams faced off in Minnesota. Feels like Sam Darnold has kicked it into another gear over the past couple weeks. He seems to have gelled a little bit more with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson's back in the lineup. And there's just a balanced approach to this Vikings team that's very unique, because I think both of us thought this was a team that could potentially have a top 10 pick based on the talent that was on the squad. And what Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores has done is nothing short of amazing. And Brian Flores, in my play caller rankings, ranks 5th prior to this week. The updated rankings come out tomorrow morning. And he gets to go up against one of the hottest head coaching candidates, and has been over the past couple off seasons, and that's Ben Johnson. And he ranks 4th in the same kind of play calling model. And the only guys that are ahead of him are Todd Monken, Joe Brady, and Liam Cohen, who are all excellent in their own respects and all probably going to be considered for head coaching candidacies as well. It will be very interesting to see if this is a 40-point shootout between these two teams, just because I could see Kevin O'Connell having his way, Sam Darnold really finding the weaknesses in this Lions defense, and Ben Johnson's just going crazy trying to get that number 1 seed. You're playing at home in week 18 for a chance of a bye, to continue playing in front of your home crowd, to force the NFC through Detroit. Like, this is going to be a very, very raucous game, and I'm excited for it because I think it will be a barn burner.
For sure. People are talking about, Josh Allen has more wins, Lamar has better stats and he looks better, Joe Burrow has like a million yards because they're always behind, Saquon hit 2,000. Sam Darnold, I'm not saying he's the MVP, but he certainly has a case to be a top 5 vote getter or in the discussion, the way he's played down the stretch, like you're talking about, really getting that rapport back with Justin Jefferson. There was like a month and a half stretch where Jefferson didn't score at all. And then they finally rectified that. And Jordan Addison finally at full health is just a weapon. He would be a number 1 receiver on a lot of teams, I think, but the luxury of having Justin Jefferson, excuse me, beside him is just crazy. TJ Hawkinson's at full speed now. That team is firing on all cylinders. And when we're talking about MVP and awards and stuff like that, Kevin O'Connell has to be the leader for Coach of the Year, in my opinion. Somebody that I think both of us didn't have on our top 10 coaches coming into the year when we did it in the offseason. I know he was in my honorable mentions. He was probably in yours as well. He's really making me rethink that ranking. Just doing this with Sam Darnold a couple years ago with Kirk Cousins. He was no Case Keenum was way back, but still, it's these quarterbacks that aren't top echelon players. He's getting the production from them with the weapons and stuff like that, and taking them to greater heights. I didn't think this team would be 14-2 at this point in the season. I didn't think they'd win 10 games. I know when Tage Seth came on, he was a bit higher on the Vikings than we were. I think his take is that Sam Darnold would play at least 10 games. He got that one right, in part due to the J.J. McCarthy injury. But they're just playing out of their mind right now. And if I want to jump ahead to like predicting the game, the way their defense is playing as well with Brian Flores, like you're talking about, I think the Vikings might steal the division and get that 1 seed, which would be insane considering this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for them, new rookie QB and everything. And then when they lost McCarthy, oh my goodness, is Sam Darnold's the QB now? It's over. 15-2, or even if they lose 14-3, is an insane mark for this team.
Yeah, and the Vikings are the perfect blueprint of how you're supposed to do a rebuild. And I know there were a lot of questions from myself included about Kwesi and his process in rebuilding this team. And you saw the difference between him and Joe Shine, who was on Hard Knocks this offseason and will get continually roasted for how he went about building the Giants roster this past year. And I think what's fascinating when you break it down is they doubled down and kept the guys that got them to the playoffs initially. And the Vikings understood roster turnover, understood that you're going to lose 50% of these players. The guys that you need to keep a grip on and make sure they don't walk out the building are your Justin Jeffersons, some of your core offensive linemen, people that are going to make a difference for the guy that's throwing the ball. And like you brought up, even though it hasn't been during the Kevin O'Connell tenure, Case Keenum did this back with Mike Zimmer and the Vikings several years back in 2017 for the 2nd seed in the NFC, and they made it to an NFC championship game. So the Minnesota fan base is not unfamiliar with these journeyman quarterbacks taking them to new heights. And I think what's exciting is that J.J. McCarthy is going to come back from injury. You don't have to feel like you have to extend Sam Darnold to a 4 or 5 year contract. You can extend him to a 2-3 year, to where if you feel like J.J. McCarthy is going to be better, that you could trade Sam Darnold to a quarterback needy team and they don't feel like they're taking on this huge long investment. They have a 1 or 2 year window to kind of evaluate Sam Darnold in their own offense. And so just how Kwesi has gone about it, how Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores have gotten these guys to play at their highest level. I mean, to unlock this kind of playmaking on both sides of the ball, it's nothing short of a lot of praise. And that's what we're giving the Vikings here. And I think Kevin O'Connell deserves Coach of the Year. He got robbed by Brian Daboll a couple of years ago in his first year. And I think it would be fair that he gets it this year, all things considered.
For sure. Granted, Brian Daboll made Daniel Jones a playoff QB, but still 13 wins a couple years ago. He should have gotten it. He, without a doubt, will get it this year. But you brought up the question, right? What do you do at quarterback next year, right? If they, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, if they make it to an NFC championship or even further, I think they kind of have to keep Sam Darnold, maybe franchise tag him a year, maybe give him like the Kirk kind of deal, like a 3-year. I'm sure he would command more than what Kirk used to give, like a 3-year, $100 million deal or something like what Baker gets. He's playing at a quite high level right now. I didn't think coming off of his Carolina Panthers tenure that he had this in him, but this just proves coaching matters. There was the tweet going around with the picture of Baker and Sam Darnold in Panthers jerseys. I'm sure it was after a practice or a game or something. It's like, could you imagine this 2 years ago that they would both be playing at such a high level? And that just goes to show you coaching matters. Matt Rule. But certainly Kevin O'Connell has done a good job. On the flip side, we've been talking a lot about the Vikings, the Lions. Their offense still looks phenomenal to me. They did and the Niners aren't like a paragon of defense at this point anymore. But the Lions offense was having their way with them last night. even without David Montgomery, who could be back for this game, it's a little dicey. But given how the injury looked, I think it's a miracle that he's like healthy enough to come back at all. What do you think about the Lions in this game? Like, is their offense going to be enough to overcome the defense of the Vikings and the Vikings attack that's going to be heavily favored against a poor Lions defense? Like, what's your thought about the Lions offense going into this game and throughout the playoffs? Because they're going to have to play teams like the Buccaneers, who beat them in week 2. I know that was a long time ago. The Eagles, who I think are, if Jalen Hurts comes back, I think their offense will be fine. Their offense won with Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee this past week. And the Los Angeles Rams, who, if Puka, Stafford, and Kupp are all healthy, their offense is really good too. So how are you going to compare the Lions offense and the totality of their team as a whole against some of these teams they're going to have to face?
I mean, when you look at the Lions, especially on offense, it starts in the trenches. And a lot of what they did on defense prior to some of these injuries also started in the trenches. I mean, you see Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson on the defensive side now on IR for pretty much the rest of the year. But on offense, that line has stayed intact for the most part. And that's allowed Ben Johnson to scheme up guys like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs to, I think, both have 10 plus rushing touchdowns on the year, to then get Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown involved in the passing game. It's just very pick your poison with how they want to execute things. But what I will say is, and knowing what we just saw with the 49ers game, 49ers jumped out to a 21-13 lead. Kevin O'Connell this year has been known to really have a good scripted game plan coming into it. And if the Vikings jump out to that kind of lead, I will be very interested to see how the Lions play from behind, because I have a lot more respect for the Vikings defense this year than the 49ers. And Jared Goff, if he's expected to drop back and you lose some of the play action and subtlety of their screen game, this could be a very long day for Detroit. Now, I don't know if you have anything else to say on this, but kind of leading in the perfect takes, my take is that both teams will score 30-plus points. It will be a one-possession game. I'm not going to sit here and say who I think will win. There's just a possibility this could go sideways really fast, considering the strengths of the Minnesota Vikings and what just happened on Monday, given a short week.
Well, I like that take a lot. And even going back further than Monday, against the Buffalo Bills, the Detroit Lions had to come from behind. They didn't get it done, but the Bills scored, what was it, 48 to 45 or something like that? 45 to 42. Whatever it was, they still scored 40 and lost. So when they go against a good offense, sometimes, in today's day and age, like if we said this 10 years ago, you'd call me crazy, but sometimes scoring 40 may not be enough when the team on the other side of the ball can go band for band with you, right? They can put up 40 or more. And so I really like the 30 point on each side kind of thing. I believe it was 31 to 29 the last time these two teams faced, and that's almost 30. If you average it, it's 30 per team. But given the state of the Lions defense now, they're both going to have to score 30 or more to make this game interesting. The Lions are going to have to score probably 40 or more if they want to win. So I really like that one. I guess we can jump into my take as well. It doesn't have anything to do with this game. It's more so looking forward for the end of the season, but this is something we'll talk more about on Thursday. The Panthers currently, let me check Tankathon again. I don't want to mess it up, but I think they currently have the 6th overall pick in the NFL draft. And in front of them are the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the same record at 4-12, and then 4, 3, and 13 teams in front of those teams. We can't pass the New England Patriots. They've pretty much locked up that number 1 overall pick. But there are different paths, different ways that the Panthers could get in front of the Browns, the Titans, the New York Giants. And I think that some of those things are going to fall in our favor, especially considering I think the Falcons are a better team than us. And I think that we will end up with a top 5 draft pick this upcoming season. That's what my take is going to be. I certainly hope at this point that Bryce goes out there and plays well in Atlanta, but I don't think we're going to overcome Bijan Robinson, who was phenomenal in that Washington game, by the way, and the rest of their offense. And I think we're going to end up losing. And I think teams in front of us, like Jacksonville, they might pull off the win against a bad Indy team. You know, the Giants might pull off a win against the Eagles that aren't going to be playing Saquon. They're a pass there. I think that we're going to end up with the top 5 pick. It could get to 2. Hopefully it's at 2 because then we'd be guaranteed like a Travis Hunter or a QB trade package. But certainly I think we'll be at 5 at the worst.
Very interesting take. It conflicts with a take I had a couple of weeks ago that I think the Panthers
Yeah.
finish the year a little bit better than the Bears, and all that has to happen. Packers win this coming Sunday, and the Panthers win as well in Atlanta. If those two things happen, Bears fans are going to lose their mind because Panthers Twitter will be on them like white on rice, and it will be very entertaining.
And importantly about that Packers and Bears game, I think the Packers are currently at the 7th seed. And if they win and Washington loses, I believe it flip-flops. So they do have something to play for if they want that 6th seed, because 7 would play 2, which is the Eagles, and 6 would play either Tampa Bay or the Rams. I personally would rather play the Rams or Tampa Bay than the Eagles at this point in time, if Jalen Hurts is healthy. So they're going to have something to play for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it should be a competitive game on Sunday. For those of you who are
We lost Steve there or not, might have a little Wi-Fi thing going on. It's a bit frozen on my end. But if he was, there we go.
There we go. I'm back. Okay, cool.
All right,
cool.
all right.
Yeah, I kept talking, and maybe it'll pick up when we upload. I don't know. The last couple minutes here, probably a little hectic for our listeners. Just wanted to kind of wrap up by saying the takes where I think the over-under set around 47, 48 and a half. Both teams score over 30 plus in the Lions-Vikings game. That obviously hits. So I'm leaning with that on my take. Your take, the Panthers have a top 5 pick. We'll be back on Thursday to discuss the Atlanta Falcons matchup and also a couple games to kind of keep an eye for with what you had your take about, and that's the draft order and kind of games that are going to have larger implications, not only for the Carolina Panthers, the draft order as it stands.
For sure. I think that's going to do it for us. Be sure to like the video on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your content. We will be back Thursday, like you mentioned, but until then, hopefully everyone has a happy and safe New Year's tonight and going into tomorrow. And we will catch you on the second day of 2025 for our first episode of the year.